going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be going back over my Stormclaw build as I've made some pretty significant changes here for the Abattoir of Xur content now that I have seen the first tier of that dungeon. Now, I would like to add that I do play hardcore, but this build will work perfectly fine for normal characters as well, and this build is insanely tanky because we will be using low life bulwark for our damage reduction. However, we still have a ton of damage because we'll be utilizing certain aspects of our Paragon board as well as our vampiric powers to get a lot of multiplicative damage out of this build. Now, you may see a drop in damage when ball sync compared to previous versions of this build, but honestly, you'll still be able to complete all the bosses in the game with no problem. And once you get the Tears of Blood glyph, the only thing you'll be concerned about is pushing higher tiers of Abattoir of Xur. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into the build. So for our assigned skills, we're going to be using Claw, Poison Creeper, Earthen Bulwark, Hurricane, and Petrify. And for our spirit boons, we're going to be running Weariness on the Deer. We're going to be spirit bonded into the eagle, and we're going to be using Scythe Talons for the critical strike chance, and we're also going to be using Avian Wrath for the increased critical hit damage. And for the wolf, we're going to be running Pack Leader to reset our Poison Creeper so we constantly immobilize and poison our enemies. And on the snake, we're going to be running Overload. Now let's go ahead and go over our uniques and our aspects, and then we'll go over our affixes on our gear once we swap over to gear stats. So for our helmet, we're using Tempest Roar, and I like Tempest Roar here because it gives us a lot of sustained damage. However, if you're looking for more burst damage, I'd probably swap into a Godslayer crown, and the best in slot helmet here would probably be a Harlequin crest, as those +4 ranks to skills goes a long way in terms of boosting up our damage as well as boosting up our survivability with Earthen Bulwark, and then we also get a nice chunk of damage reduction with Harlequin Crest. Now for our chest armor, we're running the Symbiotic Aspect, as this is a Nature's Fury build, and the Symbiotic Aspect will cool down our non-ultimate skills. Then for our gloves, we're running Conceited Aspect to give us that multiplicative damage bonus when we have a barrier active, and we'll always have a barrier active as this is a low life bulwark build. For pants, we're running Aspect of Mending Stone to increase the duration of our bulwark. For our boots, we are going to be using the Ghostwalker Aspect. Now, if you know me and you've been following my channel, you know I love Mad Wolf's Glee because of the movement speed. And I really didn't want to lose too much movement speed because I love moving fast on my characters. So the Ghostwalker Aspect was a great way to incorporate a ton of movement speed, but it also gives us the opportunity to move freely through enemies. So I thought this was a great addition to the build. Then for our weapon, we're using the Greater Staff of the Crone, and this is a must unique because obviously this is a Stormclaw build. For our amulet, we are using the Rapid Aspect to increase our attack speed with our basic skills. For our first ring, we're running Overcharge Aspect. It gives us a ton of single target and AoE damage once we get all of the monsters close together. And for our second ring, we're going to be running the Runeworker's Conduit Aspect, as the damage you get from the lightning bolt strikes from this aspect are pretty crazy. Now for the affixes on the gear pieces. I went ahead and added some affixes to the helmet slot, even though I will be running a unique. So if you are running a normal helmet, I would prefer cooldown reduction, all stats, willpower, and lucky hit chance while you have a barrier. And for the aspect, I would probably use the Aspect of Might because that will give you that nice damage reduction from your basic attacks. For your chest slot, we're going to be running Total Armor, ranks to Earthen Bulwark, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, and damage reduction. Now, obviously, you can just get a different damage reduction roll here if you needed it, but those are the ones I would prefer to have. For the gloves, we are going to have the critical strike chance, attack speed, lucky hit chance, and all stats. All stats is a flex spot. You could probably change this to willpower or something else if you'd prefer. For the pants, we are going to be running damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, total armor, damage reduction while injured, and all stats. And again, all stats is a flex spot. A good substitute for all stats would probably be dodge chance. Then for our boots, we're doing total armor while in werewolf form, movement speed, damage reduction while injured, and all stats. And again, you could flex all stats for dodge chance. For our amulet, we're running total armor while in werewolf form, movement speed, damage reduction while injured, and ranks of the Envenom passive. Now, typically, I would have a double armor roll on my amulet from previous builds, but because we're running a normal chest armor piece, I swapped out the total armor on my amulet and just put that on my chest piece so we could pick up damage reduction while injured. Now for the rings, we're going to be running critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, damage to close enemies, and critical strike damage. However, another good substitute for critical strike damage would be damage to distant enemies to buff up your Thunderstruck node on your Paragon board. Now for our gems, we're going to be running emeralds on the weapon, Amethyst on the armor, as I really like that damage reduction from damage over time effects, but you could also run rubies or sapphires on your armor, and then diamonds on the jewelry for more resistances. Now I will say I managed to cap out my resistances without running all diamonds on my gear pieces, so you could probably swap 1 or 2 diamonds for a skull if you're missing some armor. Now for our vampiric powers, and this is where we pick up a lot of multiplicative damage for Abattoir of Zur. So for the first power, we're using Domination, and this is going to give us a big pool of multiplicative damage towards enemies that are stunned, immobilized, frozen, or feared. And we're going to get a ton of immobilize out of this build because we're using Poison Creeper and Pack Leader, and we're also using Lightning skills, which have a built-in immobilize passive in the skill tree. Now, for the second one, we're using Prey on the Weak. Again, a multiplicative damage bonus towards enemies that are vulnerable, and we get a lot of vulnerability out of this build. We're also going to be using Ravenous and Moonrise to increase our attack speed. Now, for our last vampiric power, everybody's favorite is Metamorphosis. And we're not necessarily using Metamorphosis for the Unstoppable buff because we're pretty much getting that through our Earthen Bulwark. I really just like the fact that we can reposition our character easily. We can move over the top of walls as well as move through packs of enemies. Now down here at the bottom, I do have some things written out here for you guys, most of which I've went over in the video already, but go ahead and give it a look over when you get to this page. But let's go ahead and move on to the skill tree. And we're just going to go over it quickly as it's pretty straightforward. So we're going 5 points Claw into Wild Claw to give us that chance to attack twice. And then we're going 5 points Storm Strike into Fierce Storm Strike so we get vulnerability. Then for our core skills, we're just picking up Predatory Instinct for the passive to increase our crit strike chance, and then 2 points Digigrade Gate to increase our movement speed slightly. Then for our defensive skills, we're picking up 5 points Bulwark into Preserving Earthen Bulwark, as this will be our main source to build up our Fortify. Then we're going 1 point Ancestral Fortitude and then 3 points Vigilance to give us that damage reduction after using a defensive skill. And we'll always have that reduction because we're going to be spamming Bulwark. Then for our companions, we're going 1 point Poison Creeper into Brutal Poison Creeper so we get that critical strike chance against enemies affected by our Poison Creeper active skill. Then for our Wrath skills, we're going 1 point Elemental Exposure, 1 point Charged Atmosphere, and then 3 points into Electric Shock, and then 3 points into Bad Omen. Then we're going 1 point Hurricane into Savage Hurricane to give us that damage reduction from enemies affected by Hurricane. Then we're grabbing up 1 point Neurotoxin, 1 point Toxic Claws to poison up the enemies with our critical strikes, and then 3 points Envenom to give us that additional critical strike damage. For our ultimate skill, we're using Petrify, and we're going 1 more point into Prime Petrify to increase the duration. And then we're going 3 points into Defiance for the multiplicative damage bonus towards elites. And then 3 points to Natural Disaster, so we get more multiplicative damage here towards enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And again, we have a ton of immobilized with this build. And then for our key passive, we're using Nature's Fury. Now for our Paragon board, and honestly not much has changed here from previous versions of the build. However, we did pull points and spec into Height and Malice for that legendary node and that multiplicative damage, so let's go ahead and go over it real quick. So for the starter board, we are using the Earth and Sky glyph, and then we are picking up some magic nodes as well as the rare nodes here. And then we're going to be moving into our second board, Height and Malice. And as you can see here, this is where the big change was made. I just trailed off into the legendary node, Height and Malice, because we are going to be running basically nightmare dungeons here. And we're going to need that multiplicative damage bonus when we have 3 or more enemies poisoned, and we're going to be poisoning all of the enemies. Now the cool thing here is, and I noticed from the Abattoir of Zur video, that the end boss is actually 3 Bloodseekers. So we will still get a lot out of this legendary node for the end boss. And as you can see here, again, we're just using the Fang and Claw glyph. Then we're going to go ahead and move into our third board, which is Constricting Tendrils, and we're using the Werewolf glyph. And we are going to go ahead and move into some of these damage reduction and elemental resist rare nodes. And we are going to pick up some more damage here with Devastation. Then moving out of our third board into our fourth board, we are using the Thunderstruck board with the Electrocution glyph. And I am going to be picking up all of the willpower points I can get in this area so I can boost up the damage we get from the Electrocution glyph, as it's pretty significant for our build. And then we are going to trail on down here and pick up the legendary node so we can get that multiplicative damage bonus from the Thunderstruck. Then after that, we're moving into our fifth board, and this is going to be the Earth and Devastation board, only because the glyph slot is so close, and we are going to want that extra resistance here. And then our node is going to be Spirit, so we buff up our critical strike damage, and we get a nice little multiplicative damage bonus towards enemies we hit with our critical strikes. Then for our last board, we're going Ancestral Guidance, and there's really no reason other than the fact that it is so close to the start of the board. And we are going to be running Territorial because we get more damage towards enemies that are close to us, and we'll always be close to the enemies, and we get a nice little bit of damage reduction there. But that's all the changes I've made to the build, guys, now that I've actually seen the Abattoir of Xur content from the campfire chat recently. And I think this build will go a long way in terms of survivability and damage for running that content until we get the Tears of Blood glyph. And then I will be making a separate build once I have the Tears of Blood glyph that I will be posting out here on Mobalytics, and I will be making a video for that as well. I'm also working on a new build, a Subterranean Bulwark build for you guys that I hope to post out tomorrow. I'm working really hard to level it today and get some gear pieces so I can complete some content just to showcase that build for you guys, and I will be taking that build through the Abattoir of Xur as well. But that's all for the video, guys. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comment section. I will gladly answer them as soon as I see them. I hope you guys are having a great day or a great night, depending on wherever you're from, and peace out. I will see you guys in the next one.